is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Live from London, this is Global Business.
Hello, welcome to the programme. I'm Jamie Owen.
And I'm Robin Dwyer. Our top stories. A shooting at a subway station in New York. 13 people injured and 5 are thought to have been shot. We're live in the United States.
Our other headlines: Russian forces deny the use of chemical weapons in Ukraine as President Zelensky warns of a new stage of terror.
Prospects for the global economy have darkened. The World Trade Organization's stark outlook since the invasion of Ukraine.
And breaking their own rules, UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson and his Finance Minister Rishi Sunak fined for partying at Downing Street during lockdown. A number of people have been shot at a New York City subway station with undetonated devices found nearby.
Well, let's get more now from Brooklyn, where it happened, and talk to our correspondent Sarah Walton, who's there for us. Sarah, details still emerging, of course. What more can you tell us about what's happened?
What we understand at the moment is that about 8:30 in the morning, New York time, the middle of commuting hour, a train travelling through Brooklyn here. In one of the carriages, a man is believed to have set off smoke bombs, a carriage filling with smoke. Shots were fired, and we think around 16 people were injured, 8 of those with gunshot wounds. Some victims found at the 30th Street station here, others actually found a station further along the line. What we understand is that police are still looking for the perpetrator, thought to be a lone gunman wearing a high visibility vest and possibly also a gas mask. There were reports that there were explosive devices possibly on the scene. Police say they found no active devices, but we think there have been smoke bombs still found on the scene. As you can see, there are road closures in the area, and schools in this area as well were put onto lockdown to try and keep people safe. The FBI is assisting the New York Police Department with their investigation, but they've said that at this stage it's not clear if there are any links to terrorism. The mayor of the city has been briefed, but Mayor Eric Adams actually has COVID-19 at the moment. He is self-isolating, so the Governor of New York State, Kathy Hochul, is believed to be here on the scene. We're expecting her to speak to the press fairly soon, and also President Joe Biden has been made aware of the situation.
And Sarah, put this into context for us if you can. Have there been similar crimes on the subway recently?
Well, this is a city that was already on edge around subway travel, both violence on the subway and guns going up in New York for the last couple of years, really since the start of the pandemic. There's already been a number of high-profile cases since January where people have been pushed in front of subway trains and killed. And in fact, the Mayor, Eric Adams, who only took up his post in January, had promised to crack down on both gun crime and NYPD officers on patrol the street. It's not clear if there were police on this train at the time, but it is now a common sight to see police officers in your carriage on the morning and in the evenings when you're coming in and out of the city. But this incident here today just will further add to the nerves that New Yorkers have of travelling on their public transport system.
Sarah Walton in New York, thanks very much. Apologies for that slightly shaky connection to Sarah there.
Weapons experts are urging caution over fears that chemical weapons may have been used by Russian forces in Ukraine.
The country's defence ministry says it's examining claims by its military forces in Mariupol that fighters became ill after exposure to what was described as a poisonous substance. The United States says that if true, it's a deeply concerning development. The production and stockpiling of weapons of mass destruction is banned under an international treaty which Russia has signed.
Well, Jamie Shea is a former NATO Deputy Assistant Secretary-General for Emerging Security Challenges. Jamie, if chemical weapons were deployed, how does this change this conflict?
Well, it certainly would represent the crossing of a red line, because chemical weapons, of course, belong to a category called WMDs, or weapons of mass destruction, such as biological weapons, radiological weapons, nuclear weapons, of course, in that they have the capacity to kill hundreds of people, if not more, at a single go, and spread terror across wide areas. And as you rightly said in your introduction, the possession and the use of these weapons is outlawed by an international treaty that Russia signed up to in the early 1990s, even if it never totally destroyed its stockpile of chemical weapons. But the if word is an important one here, because before the international community accuses Russia formally of using chemical weapons, we have to establish the facts and we have to establish the evidence. The situation is still a bit sketchy for the time being. So, of course, a proper investigation has to be carried out to establish those facts.
Well, can we talk about that? I mean, is it possible even to prove in an environment like Mariupol, which is under siege and being bombed, if chemical weapons have been used?
Yes, it is, because obviously NATO countries today have very sophisticated detection equipment. Much of that has been transferred to Ukraine. The Ukrainian armed forces are trained in the detection of chemical weapons. And of course, if people have been injured or even killed, although there's no evidence yet of significant casualties from this attack, then obviously doctors, forensic doctors can quickly examine those people, those bodies. The traces of the chemical weapons are naturally still in the human body. And so, as on previous occasions where, for example, chemical weapons have been used in Syria or by Russian intelligence agents on 2 occasions in the United Kingdom in recent years, it's quite easy now with this sophisticated technology to determine that they are chemical weapons. But of course, they have to be chemical weapons which are explicitly banned under the Chemical Weapons Convention. And there are a number of chemicals like phosphorus or industrial chemicals that obviously are not things that anybody would want to see used on a battlefield, but which do not formally come under this Chemical Weapons Convention.
Russia watchers will say that Moscow has form on this, a record on the use of chemical weapons already, not just in Syria, but in the targeting of individuals.
Yes, absolutely. And indeed, not simply in the UK against ex-Russian spies in terms of assassination attempts, but also against Alexei Navalny, of course, the Russian opposition leader who was poisoned by his own government. And in Syria, although Russia itself is not accused of using chemical weapons, it obviously condoned the extensive use of chemical weapons on numerous occasions by the Assad regime. All of that has been well documented by a United Nations agency in The Hague called the Organization for the Prevention of Chemical Weapons, which carries out very extensive investigations and has a lot of credibility in this area. So given the rather desperate tactics that Putin has been using in Ukraine, we saw yesterday reports of rape as a war weapon. We've become used to the shelling of civilian targets. You can't exclude that Putin, in his quest to get some kind of victory quickly in Ukraine, might resort to chemical weapons. But on the other hand, when you have a specific incident, it's very important to get the facts right before proceeding further.
Jamie, good to talk to you. Thanks very much for coming on the programme. That's Jamie Shea in London.
Thank you.
The EU says that if Russia is found to have used chemical weapons in Ukraine, it would represent a security threat to us all. Foreign ministers from several member states, including the Czech Republic, Hungary and Slovakia, have been meeting to discuss the war in Ukraine.
The EU and the United Nations World Food Programme are announcing measures to help mitigate the impact of this crisis on global food security.
Well, our correspondent Giles Gibson is in Brussels. Giles, tell us more about the EU's reaction to the reports of possible chemical weapons use by Russia in Ukraine.
Yeah, well, since March, we've been hearing from the US president, from Western allies such as the European Union here in Brussels, that they are concerned about the potential use of chemical weapons by Russian forces inside Ukraine. And now we have these reports coming out of Mariupol about the potential usage of chemical weapons. The European Commission here in Brussels was asked for its response to these allegations, to these accusations that have been made. Here is what a spokesperson in charge of foreign affairs said about these accusations.
We are, of course, following the situation closely. As you know, the use of chemical weapons, including the use of toxic chemicals as weapons under any circumstances, is a breach of chemical weapons conventions to which Russia is a state party. It is also a war crime, and it represents a grave violation of international humanitarian law, which exacerbates the suffering of the civilian population. It is completely unacceptable, and it constitutes a security threat to us all.
Now, we've not had any response yet from the Kremlin or from the Russian Ministry of Defense in Moscow to these accusations about the use of chemical weapons, but we have had some comments from a spokesperson from the Donetsk People's Republic. That's a self-proclaimed republic, a breakaway region in the east of Ukraine that is very closely allied to Russia. That spokesperson insisting that their forces, at least, have not used any chemical weapons so far.
And Giles, the EU and the UN announcing initiatives to shore up global food security.
Yeah, they made a big joint announcement at a press briefing in Rome, which is where the World Food Programme, the WFP, is based. We heard from David Beasley, who is the organisation's executive director, saying that there had been a perfect storm on top of the perfect storm. Now, what he meant by that was that before the war in Ukraine broke out, there was this combination of conflicts going on in other parts of the world, the effects of climate change, as well as the ripple effects of the COVID-19, the coronavirus pandemic, really causing food prices to shoot up all over the world, and inflation, of course, in so many different parts of the world. And then he said you had this sort of another issue compounding that, the war breaking out in Ukraine, which he described as the breadbasket of the world. We also heard at this briefing in Rome from Jean-Yves Le Drian, the French foreign minister. France is currently holding the rotating presidency of the European Council, and the French are leading this effort to try to respond to this somehow. It's known as FARM, this initiative that they have launched, the Food Agricultural Resilience Mission. The idea basically is trying to get organisations like the World Food Programme, the UN, the EU, all to work together to try to respond to this crisis, which could be about to get a lot worse, because they're warning that now is the time when farmers in Ukraine should be planting their seeds, getting ready for this harvest coming up at the end of the summer. The fear is that Ukrainian farmers are fighting on the front lines and not planting, so there could be a bit of a ticking time bomb in terms of the world's food security later this year.
Giles, thanks very much. Giles Gibson there in Brussels.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, an expensive round of drinks. The UK Prime Minister and his Finance Minister both fined over those illegal lockdown parties.
The British public not only need to know, but they want to know more about China.
70 years ago, a small group of British businessmen travelled to China to unlock opportunities between the two countries. They became known as the Icebreakers.
East meets West. We're now at a time when we need the icebreaker spirit.
My first impression when I came to China is I noticed the similarities more than the differences.
It's about understanding each other's culture.
We look at the things that bring our nations together.
My dad is Chinese, my mum is English. I grew up in London, but I went to China to work at age 25.
Whenever I've gone to China, it's just been amazingly welcoming.
The music is beautiful language and bringing all the people together.
I'm exploring, I'm experimenting, I'm trying something new, all in the hopes to build a bridge. And I think we definitely need more people doing that.
It was only when I got to know my Chinese father in my 40s that I really got to know the other half of myself.
I hope we make it another 50 years, another 500 years.
Meet the bridge builders, the individuals who dared to think beyond the horizon and to open up our world on TV and online on CGTN.
I hope that you will all become icebreakers and bridge builders.
Hello, welcome back to Global Business Europe. And a quick reminder, CGTN is available to watch for free on all of the major digital platforms, on smart TV or online on Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV, YouTube, Dailymotion, CGTN.com and the CGTN app, and in the UK on Freeview.
Washington is bracing for a grueling consumer inflation report expected to show American prices soaring in March. Well, let's talk now to our correspondent John Tarrant in New York. So, John, we're hearing talk of extraordinarily elevated inflation from the White House, but what does that mean?
Yes. I don't know. It's a good question, Jamie and Robin. I mean, that is what you call diplo-speak. That's what you do when you write speeches for the president. You put out press releases from the White House. Look, I think it's a kind of apology. That's what I think it is. Because extraordinary elevated really does tell us that we have a situation that we've not seen before. And I think that the White House bears in mind that in November there are crucial midterm elections coming up, and they are likely to get a shellacking, the Democratic Party. All the polls suggest that, just like President Obama got a shellacking after his first 2 years in the White House. And I think that a lot of Democratic voters are being hurt by this extraordinary 40-year high inflation that we're witnessing here in the United States and also around the world as well. Look, we now know that the Federal Reserve, the central bank, is about 6 months behind on where it probably should be in terms of raising interest rates, which is the traditional cure for high inflation. They only started last month. They probably should have started 6 or 7 months ago, economists now say. So here are the numbers then. Year over year, it's at 8.5%, which means really it's at 10%, or will soon get to 10%. The figure today was 0.1% above the estimate from Wall Street. So you have to go back to President Reagan in 1981 to find inflation rising so fast here. Take out food and energy, they've gone, and it was 6.5%, which is bang in line with what Wall Street had been expecting. And here's the thing now, month on month, so February to March, it was 0.3%, and Wall Street had been expecting 0.5%. So the question is inflation, which the Biden administration and the central bank has always said it would, is it now peaking? A bit late, but is it at last peaking? We'll see in a minute. Now, food, energy and shelter are the three key drivers of this, and I'll tell you for nothing, here on the floor, people are very concerned about food, because if people are seeing huge inflation in their daily and weekly food shop, then that means they're very likely to stop spending in other parts of the economy, and you know what that means. So we know we're getting major hikes in interest rates in May when the central bank next meets. It's going to be at least 50 basis points. That, of course, could hurt business as well in another way. Deutsche Bank is the first big bank to predict a recession in the United States, not this year, but probably early in 2023. And I remember standing outside the stock exchange on the street talking to you on this program back in mid-2020. And I said to you, all this stimulus that's being pumped into the economy is going to create inflation, but nobody cares. I remember saying that. Nobody cared. What we needed to do at that point was keep everybody afloat and solvent. And now, 2 years down the road, inflation is a real problem and it's beginning to kick in. But finally, Dow, Nasdaq and S&P are all sharply up just now because they've taken note of that month-on-month increase in inflation, which was less, and they're hoping it may have peaked. Guys?
Well, John, I've got another question which starts with, what does he mean? Mark Zuckerberg talking about the metaverse. He says he wants to make it easier for users to spend and make money. But could this work?
Well, this is a fabulous story. I love talking about this. Now, the thing is, when you talk about the metaverse, it's a bit too early to know, okay? Zuckerberg and Meta platforms are driving this push towards this virtual reality meta world that most of us don't know very much about. It's 10 or 15 years away at the moment. Some people say that they're doing it in order to take away from the issues that surround Meta platforms, such as peer pressure on teenage girls and Instagram and that sort of stuff. But let me just quickly run through some of the things that are happening right now today, and you probably don't know about them. First of all, NFTs, non-fungible tokens, are the big thing. People right now, you can't see them, but they're doing it, are buying up art and real estate and sporting memorabilia from the days when their team had its glory days. And they're doing it virtually online, and they own it. I was at dinner on Saturday night, and I was shocked to see a friend of one of my daughters has already bought $2,000 worth of real estate around the United States, but it's only virtual. But he owns the property online. The Sun newspaper a couple of days ago was reporting that murder and rape and violent crimes can be prosecuted in the meta world now using verbal crimes such as menace and harassment and stalking. Coca-Cola has a virtual drink. They're predicting that you'll be able to taste it somehow sooner or later. Paris Hilton is hosting virtual parties on a virtual island. This is happening right now. And so Zuckerberg is saying they're developing the tools at Meta in order to be able to buy and sell things that you create in your virtual world. But he's warning that the company will take a huge chunk, somewhere between 20 and 30%. The question, or even 50% actually, the question, of course, is this the king's new clothes? Are we seeing a king on a horse in a parade with no clothes on? And that's what nobody really quite knows at this moment. It's sort of exciting and frankly ridiculous all at the same time.
John, good to talk to you. John Terrett there in New York.
Now, the UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson and his Finance Minister Rishi Sunak have been fined for attending illegal parties during lockdown in Downing Street. Boris Johnson is the first serving UK Prime Minister to be sanctioned for breaking the law. Let's talk to our correspondent Andrew Wilson, who's been following the story for us. Just give us some more detail about these fines for the Prime Minister and his Chancellor.
Well, Jamie, as you remember, a couple of weeks ago we had the first announcement, 20 fines issued by the Metropolitan Police in their investigation into parties taking place in Downing Street and other government buildings. That number's now gone up to 50, and the latest tranche of 30 fines issued. Sunak is named as one recipient, the Prime Minister named as another, and his wife Carrie Johnson named as a third. The calculations people are making is that this then refers to, although the police haven't mentioned it, his birthday party, the famous cake being given into the cabinet room with plenty of people gathered to receive and applaud the arrival of the cake and the celebration of the birthday. It would appear that that was the event in question. Both Rishi Sunak and the Prime Minister, of course, up until this moment denied attending parties. They said that all guidelines were followed. When this first became a scandal back in December, the Prime Minister said twice, once in an interview and once in Parliament, all guidelines were followed. Well, this fine from the police would suggest that the Metropolitan Police see things otherwise. Now, the police investigation followed Sue Gray's report, a civil servant, into the matter. Her report is still yet to be published in full, but one would have thought that this censure by Her Majesty's police force would be about as bad as it can get in terms of optics for the Prime Minister and indeed the other civil servants working in and around Downing Street.
And calls from the leader of the opposition Labour Party for the Prime Minister Boris Johnson to resign. What does this mean for his future?
Well, the Labour Party has always been calling for Boris Johnson to resign. They called when parties first became an issue. They called when mishaps happened in terms of PPE and other matters in COVID. They're always calling for the Prime Minister to resign. There were some, when this first came to light back at the beginning of the year, some members of the Prime Minister's own party who also called for him to resign. There will be a real drubbing now in the court of public opinion. Families who lost family members during the COVID crisis have already been quite outspoken about how they feel about the Prime Minister and the prospect of parties taking place while other people were suffering around the country. But it's not the court of public opinion that will unseat a Conservative Prime Minister. That's never happened before. It's the party itself that makes up its own mind. And there's only one real reason why the party would change its mind about Boris Johnson, and that's if he became an electoral liability. There are regional elections coming up in England in May this year, and of course possibly a general election perhaps not next year, but the year after. Now, that's where Tory MPs will become most focused about whether or not they want this man, Boris Johnson, to be fighting for their party when they go into those national contests. Of course, as I said, publicly, a few Tories did say that they wanted to go for a vote of no confidence. They publicly withdrew those letters of complaint. When the Ukraine war started, that became something that Boris Johnson was given the opportunity to shine in. He's widely considered to have done well as far as dealing with the Ukraine crisis is concerned. And privately, a lot of Conservative MPs are saying, well, we've got this business of Ukraine going on. It's unseemly for us to pursue these other squabbles. So it could be that the Russian invasion of Ukraine has given Boris Johnson, at least for now, some breathing space on that. But his own people will be watching him closely from now on.
Andrew, thanks for that. Our correspondent, Andrew Wilson.
The war in Ukraine has put a fragile global trade recovery at risk. The World Trade Organization says the world economy is going to suffer severe consequences and poorer countries would be particularly impacted.
Supply chain bottlenecks that started in the pandemic, further disruption due to Russia's invasion and soaring energy prices all continue to affect global trade growth. Our correspondent Juliet Mann has more. Juliet.
Thanks, Jamie and Robin. And I know John was talking about how inflation wasn't something the markets worried about a year ago. Well, they do now. The global economy is at a critical juncture. Trade wars, COVID, threadbare logistics networks, the spillover effect of the war and sanctions imposed on Russia, all are keeping investors up at night and are stopping trade in its tracks. Is it any wonder then that the WTO has slashed its growth forecasts? Now, the organisation previously predicted merchandise trade growth volume to grow at 4.7%, but they've revised it down to just 3% this year and to 3.4% next year. And just to give you an idea of how weak those numbers are, look at what happened last year. The volume of trading goods rose 3 times as much, almost 10% in 2021 to $22.4 trillion. The outlook for world GDP is also less optimistic, expected to rise 2.8% after rising 5.7% last year. WTO boss Dr. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala warned of a potential food crisis because of disruptions to exports from Ukraine and Russia.
We need to act and act decisively on this issue of food in order to avoid food riots, as the like of which we began to experience in 2008-2009 food crisis. And we're already seeing in some countries now, you see demonstrations in Sri Lanka, in different countries all over the world.
Services trade will also be affected by the war, notably in the transport and logistics sectors. Things like shipping pallets made of Russian nails and wood from Belarus and Ukraine are becoming scarce all around Europe, and that's led to production halts and component shortages for companies all over the world. Well, Coleman Nee is senior economist at the World Trade Organization.
Well, not in a spiraling global crisis, because we still have a forecast for trade growing and global GDP growing in 2022, but the pace of growth has slowed substantially, at least as far as our perspective is concerned.
Commodities have been badly affected, but some manufactured goods have had steadier growth, haven't they? Talk us through.
Well, there has been a gradual recovery in some of the sectors that were affected by supply chain hiccups last year. You had shortages of semiconductors that were reducing output of automobiles, and also backups in ports, particularly in the west coast of the United States. And these issues were gradually being worked out. You saw increasing container throughput in U.S. ports at the start of the year here. You also had increased trade in semiconductors. And so while delivery times were still long and shipping rates were still high, things were moving in a better direction. But now this conflict risks exacerbating these pre-existing problems.
Which parts of the world, which countries are going to be most affected by this turmoil?
Well, the immediate impact, of course, is going to be in Ukraine and also in Russia. But the largest trading partner of both of these countries is Europe. So we would expect to see higher prices for commodities, but also a number of countries, particularly in the area of foodstuffs, are highly dependent on exports from both Russia and Ukraine. Particularly in the Middle East and Africa, a number of countries import more than half of their grain from wheat from Russia and Ukraine. Also, there are knock-on effects potentially in certain manufacturing sectors. So, for example, Russia is the world's largest exporter of palladium, which is used in automobile manufacturing to make catalytic converters. And a number of countries like Korea, United States, Canada, Italy, these countries import 40 to 50% of their palladium from Russia. And to the extent that this might be interrupted by the conflict, at least it's threatening the automobile sector again, just when it was recovering from some of its the supply issues that it was facing last year.
Do you think that the supply chain issues have caused a splintering of global trade? And what are the dangers, perhaps, of there being rival systems?
I don't think that the supply chain issues have done that. Of course, there are constraints in various places and that have caused companies to rethink some of their strategies. They may choose to hold larger inventories than they had in the past, or do some limited reshoring. But we don't see a real retrenchment from globalization. We may see some anecdotal examples of businesses reshoring manufacturing, but for the most part, globalization remains in place. But the geopolitical concerns as a result of the crisis might lead to geopolitical issues becoming a determining factor in trade. And also, with the food crisis, many countries may be tempted to impose export restrictions to secure their own food supplies, but this could just exacerbate the global situation, leaving the poorest countries just having to make do with less.
So prospects for the global economy are not great. And remember, these numbers are estimates and likely hazier than usual due to the uncertain nature of the conflict, plus ongoing COVID caution and concerns. Sorry to be the bearer of more bad news.
Yeah, you are a cheery soul. Juliet, thank you very much for that.
The war in Ukraine is having a knock-on effect on UK crop production, driving up costs of fuel and fertiliser.
Ukraine and Russia produce nearly a third of the world's grain, and now those exports are disrupted, leaving global food markets in turmoil. Kitty Logan reports now from Surrey in England.
UK farmers were already facing an uphill struggle when the war in Ukraine began. Since then, fertiliser and fuel costs have climbed sharply, leaving farmers trying to navigate new obstacles which are making crop production more costly. So, farmer Lawrence Matthews is monitoring events in Ukraine very closely.
It affects the exchange rates on the currencies and it affects the prices of the fertilisers we buy and the grains we sell. So we could be constantly watching it, and that really does drive the way we plan our way forward.
2 years ago, the UK imported a quarter of its fertiliser from Russia. But gas is a key ingredient, and those costs are up, meaning it's tripled in price.
The UK is hooked on a supply of fertiliser that in part comes from unstable regimes like Russia. And during the height of the crisis, we saw Vladimir Putin sabre-rattling and threatening the world with even higher food prices.
With farm work in full swing in springtime, rising diesel costs add to the financial pressure.
The war in Ukraine has created a real challenge for farmers. The rapidly rising cost of fertiliser is just one factor that's making food production much more expensive.
And as Ukrainians struggle to sow this season, many crop prices are up.
This is coming out into flower now.
While the UK grows its own oilseed rape, it also imports this high-demand product from Ukraine for cooking oils.
The production has dropped because the Ukrainians are maybe not going to produce any or some rape this year, so there's going to be more demand. So effectively, we want to grow more rape going forward.
The UK produces around half its own food, meaning there's no scarcity. But there's now pressure on UK farmers to grow more. Yet wheat production costs are shooting up too, creating a cash flow problem.
The challenge is addressing those and planning a way forward so that we can carry on producing profitably but still provide food, as you know, that's our job, at a reasonable cost to consumers.
With many Ukrainian ports blocked, the selling price of wheat soared at the start of the war too.
it means there's less grain on the world market, then we're going to have to step up and produce more, which means we're going to have to source our inputs from somewhere else at the best price we can get them. But ultimately, the price of the inputs will drive the grain price.
The government says it plans to support farmers through the fertiliser crisis, but the long-term fix could lie in cutting dependency on fossil fuels.
Part of the solution is already beginning to come through from British industries that are helping us to replace gas through the rollout of renewables, or might in the future help to replace fertiliser through the production of low-carbon fertilisers here in the UK.
The National Farmers Union is warning that disruption to food production and supply may last years. It seems we're in for the long haul before food prices go down again. Kitty Logan, CGTN, Surrey.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, Russian-backed forces deny that chemical weapons have been used in Ukraine as the focus of fighting turns to the Donbas region.
It is now important that all of us in Europe act very swiftly.
Fines for the non-vaccinated will most likely be between $1,000 and $4,000.
The new Omicron variant circulating in southern Africa.
The financial markets have also reacted badly to the news.
Growing dissatisfaction with the way the Dutch government is handling the pandemic.
Cancelling the city's main public Christmas markets for the second year in a row.
Protests and riots by those opposed to restrictions and vaccinations.
There is no room for complacency in this ongoing battle against COVID.
On the agenda with me, Stephen Cole, we look up into space. We look down into data. We look at debt. We look at politics. We look at opioids, climate change. We look at all the issues that really matter around the world. But you matter too. We want to tell the stories you want to see and hear about. Make it your agenda.
The agreement is signed. But what is the real deal now the UK has left the EU? For trade, for business, for the city, for ordinary people. Make sense of Brexit with CGTN.
Ever wondered what's the difference between a bear and a bull market? Where are the cash cows? And who are the lame ducks? And what exactly are black swans? Grey rhinos? And unicorn companies? Make sense of it all with Global Business, only on CGTN.
Hello, welcome back to Global Business Europe with Jamie Owen and Robin Dwyer. Our top stories: a shooting at a subway station in New York, 16 people injured, of which at least 8 have been shot.
And Russian forces deny the use of chemical weapons in Ukraine as President Zelensky warns of a new stage of terror.
Well, as we've been reporting, Russian-backed forces in Ukraine have denied that chemical weapons have been used in the besieged city of Mariupol.
Ukraine's defense ministry says it's investigating reports that chemical substances may have been dropped by a Russian drone. The United States says, if true, the developments are deeply concerning. Meanwhile, the Ukrainian authorities say Moscow is bringing tens of thousands of troops to its eastern border near the Donbas region ahead of a new assault. Let's talk now to Associated Press reporter Philip Crowther, who's in Lviv. Philip, weapons experts are urging caution over these claims, but what is Ukraine saying?
Well, as you mentioned, the Deputy Defence Minister saying that they're looking into the possible use of phosphorus munitions, which is not a chemical weapon, but still would be a very serious escalation in this war, of course. Now, what we're dealing with here is very, very difficult to verify independently because of the lack of journalists on the ground in Mariupol, the lack of anybody really on the ground in Mariupol other than those Ukrainian forces who made that allegation in the first place, and the civilians who they say were also affected by the use of a chemical weapon. Here is what the Azov regiment says. It's a unit, a part of the Ukrainian armed forces. It says that a poisonous substance came from a drone that hit both them and civilians. Now, again, impossible to verify this. The Russian-backed forces in that area deny the use of a chemical weapon. But, of course, this leads to all Western governments. They're reacting to the possibility of its use, saying that it would be a very serious escalation of this war. Now, the situation in Mariupol, the city in the southeast of that Donbass region, rather in the southeast of Ukraine, part of the Donbass region, is very difficult to really analyze right now. We know that there's fierce fighting over control of that city, and that it might be getting into its final stages here. There are, of course, differing accounts on this, but Mariupol is strategically so important to the Russian forces because it would establish that land bridge, the complete land bridge that Russia wants, that would lead it to its occupied part of the Donbass region in the south all the way to the annexed Crimean Peninsula. The Russian forces can't yet say to 100% that they have all of that terrain because there is still a part of Mariupol that has been fought over.
And Ukraine is claiming that there's another massive troop deployment by the Russians underway near the Donbass region.
Yes, absolutely. All signs point to an upcoming offensive. The Pentagon, by the way, says that it is not yet underway, that essentially it is still only being prepared. But we do know that there is a convoy of Russian armored vehicles on its way from the area around Kharkiv, that's in the northeast of the country, part of the Donbass region, a convoy moving south toward the city of Izum. That is, of course, also in the Donbass region, part of those cities that Russian forces will want to get control over. Now, remember that Russia has a very, very big presence already in that Donbass region. Russian-backed separatists have been there for 8 years and have been fighting Ukrainian forces since 2014. Those are areas that Russian-backed separatists had under their control that are now under Russian control, and they want to get more terrain. But there's also, of course, a very significant Ukrainian force there also, because this war has been raging in the Donbass region for 8 years now. What we are seeing are Russian troop movements outside of Ukraine, inside of Ukraine, from the south, but also from the east and from the north. And we're also seeing an increase in missile attacks in that area as well. All of this, of course, foreboding what is considered to be the possibility of a massive Russian offensive in that Donbass region in eastern Ukraine.
Philip Crowther in Lviv, many thanks.
Well, President Putin has defended Russia's invasion of Ukraine, describing his objectives as noble. Speaking ahead of a meeting with the Belarusian president, Putin also claimed international attempts to isolate Russia would fail. Our correspondent Laura Makin-Isherwood is in the Latvian capital, Riga. Laura, the meeting is being held at a Russian space facility. What else has Putin been saying?
Yeah, this meeting was held there because President Putin wanted to use it on the 61st anniversary of Yuri Gagarin's mission to space to basically push the fact that he wants Russia to continue its own space exploration program alongside Belarus. And that also was why Alexander Lukashenko, the leader of Belarus, was there as well. But it wasn't the only thing on the table for discussion there between those two leaders. Also, peace talks, negotiations, they were being aired as well, those possibilities. And it seems like Alexander Lukashenko wanted to be involved in those. President Putin appeared to say after that meeting that it offered a suitable platform, he said, for those peace talks to continue. But in the last few hours, President Putin appears to have come back on that and said that actually peace talks have now hit a dead end, looking at Ukraine as being offering up these claims, he said, these allegations that Russian troops are not acting responsibly, those sexual assault claims, those claims that a chemical weapon may have been used. And that, he says, is placing these peace talks at a dead end. Instead, he pushed forward in defending his troops' actions, saying that they were acting nobly, that actually this special military operation, as he calls it, in Ukraine was to defend Russia and protect people in Donbass, and he seems sure that it will be successful.
It's an obvious thing. It was unavoidable. The only question was one of timing. The thing we are doing, on one hand, we're helping people, saving them from Nazism. On the other hand, we are taking measures to ensure Russia's own security. It's obvious we had no other choice. It's the right decision. We have no doubt our goals will be achieved.
Laura, unconfirmed reports of Russian weapons being moved to the border with Finland.
Yes, so this was a video uploaded to Twitter that sparked this concern. It hasn't been verified either, and it was uploaded just a few hours after a warning was given by the Kremlin to say that it didn't want Finland and Sweden to apply to join NATO, the alliance which, of course, has been at the root of many of the issues that Russia has with the West at the moment. And it appears to show in this video 2 coastal defence systems being moved along a road that runs alongside the border between Russia and Finland. It appears to show signs pointing to Helsinki in the background as well. As I said, they have not been verified. But this move would be an indication that Russia is trying to perhaps offer an intimidation tactic, we think, to Finland, to Sweden, to the rest of NATO, and a clear demonstration, I suppose, if it is true, that they are serious when they say they do not want NATO's borders to expand even further. NATO, the US, officials from the Western nations across this area of the continent say that it is up to Finland and Sweden as to whether they wish to apply. And we understand from US officials that that could happen as soon as June.
Laura, thanks for that. Our correspondent Laura Makin-Isherwood in the Latvian capital, Riga.
Pakistan's Shehbaz Sharif has been sworn in as the country's new Prime Minister, taking over from Imran Khan, who was ousted in a no-confidence vote. More than 100 lawmakers loyal to Khan have resigned in protest, threatening a political crisis for Sharif.
Indonesia has passed a landmark bill to tackle sexual violence. The legislation aims to make it easier to secure justice in a country where sexual abuse has often been regarded as a private matter. The bill covers crimes both within and outside marriage, including jail terms for forced marriages and sexual exploitation.
At least one person has been killed and at least 7 injured in an explosion near the Lebanese city of Sidon. The blast demolished a building. Local reports suggest it had been used to store weapons and ammunition.
The EU has begun discussions on reports of misappropriation of taxpayers' money and democratic backsliding in Hungary, which could result in it withholding funding.
That comes after the European Commission announced it was starting action against Viktor Orban's government over the way it uses EU funds. Our correspondent Nick Harper reports.
50 kilometres outside Budapest, in the small village of Felsút, is a building that many see as a symbol of corruption in Hungary. An enormous football stadium built by a company belonging to one of the Prime Minister's friends that serves a town with a population of barely 1,700 people. Some have condemned the project, especially as the stadium is built directly opposite the football-loving Prime Minister's weekend home. The European Commission accuses Viktor Orban's government of misusing EU funds, funneling cash towards construction projects that benefit his closest allies. Analyst Patrick Serela says the message coming from the EU is clear.
The European Commission has started taking seriously the protection of European taxpayers' money, and it shows that there is now a political will to sort of do something in order to not only secure European taxpayers' funds, but to secure European values in EU member states as well.
In Felsút, there are some other projects that have led to some head-scratching back in Brussels. This train station was funded by the EU using about $2 million of the bloc's funding, but it has very little purpose, only connecting the football stadium with one neighbouring village, about 6 kilometres away. People here are divided on the impact of a potential loss of EU funds.
It's obvious that it could harm the country's economy. Otherwise, it would be nice if something would happen to the rule of law in Hungary, because it's in a really bad condition, I think.
I see it as a real issue, but in reality it's a witch hunt.
At the meeting in Luxembourg, the Hungarian government again denied any wrongdoing.
We can stand criticism, and we are all lawyers. Hungary used to be also the nation of lawyers, so we're happy to answer all these concerns, but we would like to refuse all kinds of double standards and stigmatizations.
But Orbán allies continuing to score projects like these may well put Hungary offside of EU rules. Nick Harper, CGTN, Feldschut, Hungary.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, Lloyd's of London forced to close its headquarters after being targeted by Extinction Rebellion climate protesters.
So this is it. I'm just about to be shot.
Tents here, bottles are being thrown as they do so.
There are about 3 critical bridges here in Malawi. That's one of them. We're going to cross that bridge.
As you can see behind me, police forces
who are replying with gas. Gas just came in. Tear gas. So it's all begun now.
Divisions leading the charge into West Mosul have brought us here.
Just got to be careful here with some gunshots.
This is where most of the fighting has been concentrated.
Is the front line now after 9 days of fighting?
We're about 2 to 3 kilometers from the front line. Within clear view of this front line position.
Have you ever wondered how much a human life is worth?
Have you ever looked up at the night sky and considered whether aliens are staring back? Or if it's even possible to measure intelligence?
If that sounds like you, it's time to join the Answers Project with me, Stephen Cole.
And me, Mari Beveridge.
We've recruited the best brains in the world, award-winning astrophysicists, giants of medical science, and former presidential advisors to help us tackle humanity's biggest questions.
Find the answers wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe. Climate protesters used superglue, chains and bike locks to block entrances to one of the world's best-known insurers, Lloyd's of London, forcing it to close for the day and advise its employees to switch to remote trading.
Climbers also scaled the outside of the building and hung a banner which said, "End fossil fuels now." Our correspondent Andrew Wilson has the story.
The Extinction Rebellion protests are all part of an Easter campaign focused mostly on central London, but including some sites around the city. This latest was outside Lloyd's of London at the heart of the financial centre. One banner highlighting the insurance giant's involvement in a multi-billion-dollar Canadian pipeline project. The protests have varied in size, but their persistence will be of concern to police, who are repeatedly caught off guard by the sit-ins and marches. At the weekend, 3 crucial bridges were closed by demonstrators. The famous Tower Bridge by climbers lashing themselves to the structure and hanging a 22-metre banner. But also 2 larger road bridges further up the river. This is, according to Extinction Rebellion, an occupation, and the target remains the same each time. Government investment in the fossil fuel industry and oil and gas exploration. The capital has grown used to these appearances. However, tempers can be tested, and there were 38 arrests as the bridge protests were cleared. Altogether, there have been nearly 350 arrests since the protests began 2 weeks ago.
I think the tactics that they've used have been excessive, and also, frankly, I think Extinction Rebellion's tactics have given the Conservative Party an excuse to reduce and remove all of our rights to protest. I think probably the Tory government wanted to do it anyway.
We are protesting against the expansion of new oil and gas projects. We're asking the government to stop investing further into fossil fuels. We're asking them to stop subsidising fossil fuels and stop issuing new licences.
Extinction Rebellion's protests follow last week's UN report warning that irreversible climate change is almost inevitable, with greenhouse gas emissions at their highest levels ever over the last decade. There are a few more days until the Easter weekend, so the protests are unlikely to stop just yet. The police complain it's expensive to manage them and also that the demonstrations themselves can be dangerous and illegal. To the campaigners, that's small price to pay in the face of what they persistently describe as the destruction of the planet. Andrew Wilson, CGTN.
The biggest gas utility company in the United States says it wants to build the country's largest green hydrogen energy infrastructure system. Gas company SoCalGas says it'll help California meet its environmental targets.
While some say the move is a big win for reliable and inexpensive energy, there are questions about its cost and environmental impact. Our correspondent Adiz Tianshan reports.
It takes more than 68 billion liters of natural gas daily to power up millions of homes and thousands of businesses in Southern California. But the nation's largest gas utility, SoCalGas, recently proposed building the largest clean hydrogen infrastructure in the country.
And I think they're understanding that they're an infrastructure company, perhaps more than they are a gas company. But I am here on behalf of all of us, trying to clean our air and deal with the extremes, extreme heat, drought, and wildfires. And we need to move past fossil fuels.
The proposal supports the integration of more renewable electricity resources like solar and wind, while significantly reducing greenhouse gas emissions from electric generation, industrial processes, heavy-duty trucks, and other sectors.
I think the big win here is inexpensive and reliable energy to support the growth of industry and life in California. I think it's great that it's going to have less environmental footprint and less atmospheric CO2 footprint.
According to the proposal, new pipelines by SoCalGas would supply hydrogen to power plants in the Los Angeles area to generate electricity when solar panels, wind turbines, and batteries are not providing enough.
And if all goes as planned, Los Angeles could achieve its goal of becoming the first major U.S. city to run entirely on clean electricity by 2035.
Although hydrogen combustion doesn't have a carbon footprint, it does generate toxic pollutants like nitrogen oxide, much more than fossil gas, at least with the currently available technology. But scientists are convinced that cleaner and cheaper hydrogen is within reach.
The costs can come down very quickly, from numbers that are maybe $7 a kilogram down to $2, can happen with not that many gigawatts of installed capacity. And by doing that, you can get over the hump, much like solar did around 2010, and then can see continued cost reductions over time that I think will open up a myriad of opportunities to use hydrogen.
The Biden administration has also set a goal to lower the cost of hydrogen to open the way for more clean energy investments beyond California. It is Tianshan, CGTN, Los Angeles.
The headlines again. A shooting during rush hour at Brooklyn subway station in New York. At least 16 people were injured, including 10 people who were shot.
Our other headlines: Russian forces deny the use of chemical weapons in Ukraine as President Zelensky warns of a new stage of terror.
And breaking their own rules. UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson and Finance Minister Rishi Sunak fined for partying at Downing Street during lockdown.
And that's it for Global Business Europe. Thank you for watching.
Coming up next on CGTN, it's Africa Live. We'll see you again tomorrow, same time, same place. From all of the team here in London, goodbye.
Goodbye.